Welcome to the Beaches Branch. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of Consolidation, which will occur on October 1st. I have partnered with my favorite partner, Beaches Watch, to bring you a very, very special program tonight, which is very near and dear to my heart. Consolidation and heart is not always something that we put together, but it's something that I have a lot of respect for. So what I would like to do is introduce our panelists. First, we have Bill Basford, who was on the City Council in 1967. Former City Council Auditor Bob Johnson, who was just a young man, probably right out of college, right? Who was the council auditor that you worked for? Then we have Matt Carlucci. A lot of you will remember Matt from his time on the council, not once, but how many? Three times. And you may be wondering why Matt is here. Matt is here because his father was Joseph Carlucci, who was dynamo on the council. Bill Gulliford is here. Bill, you were around at Consolidation, right?
Actually, my oldest son was born on October 1st, 1968.
Well done.
How about that?
Well.
So I'll go take him a present this Monday. Maybe I'll give him the book, The Quiet Revolution.
But I did not want to do this program without him because he has the most experience in dealing with the interlocal agreement, which some of you may recall from the 1990s. I think that may even be how Beaches Watch got formed. Am I correct about that? But Bill has a lot of experience in making sure consolidation is working correctly. Then we have Walter Williams, former city councilman, and Walter Dickinson, who was the Beaches councilman for the Beaches District, which was then District 1. If you can believe that. And last but certainly not least, we have one of my favorite people, our moderator, Professor Tim Gilmore. I have so many people I want to recognize. I'm going to just try to do it really quickly. We have in the back the president of our Friends group, Josh Messenger. We have our library director, Tim Rogers. Tim. I heard Harry Shorstein was coming, but I don't see him. And nor did Jim Ryan. But we do have Mr. Richard Bowers, who some of you will remember has served under many mayors in many capacities. Richard Wallace, also former city council auditor. Mayor Elaine Brown, former Mayor Dick Brown. Yay. And Jim Overton, Jim Overton, former city council member, sitting next to his buddy, John Pressenbetty, who is on the council right now. And Chris Hoffman, I see you're all sitting there, 1, 2, 3. Okay, am I leaving anybody out?
Rory Diamond.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Rory, I did not recognize you. Welcome. Let's see if I missed anybody else. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Thank you very much. I want to try to be brief. We are here for 2 hours tonight, and really we can have this discussion for a whole college semester. So I want to real quickly thank Teresa Rooney and the Public Library and all of our public servants who are here with us, who have given so much to the city and this community for so many years. And real quickly, I want to say the best discussions, I think, don't end when they end, which means that I think this discussion that we had tonight and the discussions that we start tonight will continue into the into the community after this evening. So I have a series of questions, some of which are my own, a number of which came from different people from the community who contacted me over the last couple of weeks. And if possible, I'd like to get your thoughts both fully and succinctly, so there's a balance because of time. So here's my first question, and whoever wants to take it can take it. Hopefully, we'll get something from each of you. But could you share with us a memory of the time leading up to consolidation or amidst its taking effect that the public at large might not know? Your memories, related as they are to this specific historic event, are invaluable. So, really intrigued by what. Who wants to start?
Matthew Carlucci. My dad, Joe Carlucci, was on the first consolidated City Council of Jacksonville. And he had a very fertile imagination. And to prove the point that St. John's River was highly polluted and there were outfalls, he and some buddies went and poured lots of red dye at the old City Hall at 220 East Bay Street in the toilets. Only the men's toilets, but the toilets. And they poured them in there, and they flushed. They poured them in there, and they flushed. They poured them in there, and they flushed. And they walked out to the end of the parking lot. About 20 minutes later, here comes the red dye. And so that was kind of a way of proving the point that St. John's was. And the other thing that our family did, that's a great memory to me, in etched in my soul forever, was the signs that we made. My brother was 7 years older than I was, and he was a very good artist. He knew how to do silk screening, so my father decided to take advantage of that talent he had. And, well, there was like 11 public officials indicted, and on 142 counts of stealing money, bribery, larceny. It was awful. I told some folks earlier here, it was an accumulation of crises that made consolidation actually pass. So my father decided he wanted to put a sign together, so my brother designed one that said, run the rascals out of City Hall. And we printed about 700 of those signs in our backyard. My job was to take it from underneath the silk screen, run it to the corner of the yard, put it down so it would dry, and then come back and get the next one. Over and over and over. And then this was all about maybe 2 to 3 weeks before the election for consolidation. We placed those signs in the most strategic spots all over the place where we knew that they would count the most. And I can remember as a 12-year-old, me and my dad being out till 12, 1, 2 o'clock, hanging signs that said, run the rascals out of City Hall, and it caused quite a stir in the news the next couple of days. Also, we made some signs that said, happiness is yes, so that meant to vote yes for the consolidation. And we actually did about 2,000 of those, and hung them everywhere in pamphlets, and so it was quite a day, and that's my great memory of the time with my family.
One of the first memories I have is when the city council started. They actually took office in 1967. They were elected in 67, and then they began their offices in 1968. The first 2 employees that were hired were the council auditor and the council secretary. The council auditor was Gene McLeod, my boss, and the council secretary was Dave McNamara. And I remember we were on the 13th floor of the City Hall, and we were the only 2 employees that 13th floor. And we were on, and then Gene hired me, and I came in July 1, 1968, 3 months before consolidation. But Bill had been on the city council, and on the county commission. He was chairman of the county commission, and he he was also elected to serve on the first city council. But what I remember most vividly is there are lots of folks that did not want consolidation, especially people who were in the county and who were in the city. First of all, they're employees. You're a county employee. You didn't know what your position would be. Into a city, you didn't know what your position would be. And most of the people, and elected officials, they were opposed to it. As a matter of fact, Bill might remember this, I said that one of the officials that was in charge of the county records threw them away. Well, he didn't throw them away, but he dumped them in an attic. And there was one fellow that's not here tonight, but he deserves a lot of credit, and Walter Williams remembers him very well, named Royce Lyle. Royce was just a monkey in the city department, county department. Nobody was trying to put a budget together. So Royce volunteered. He says, I'll go out there and try to put a budget together, but nobody did. And for him, and 2 or 3 of his employees, George Dandelake was one, he hired out of the fresh graduate from JU. And they started putting this budget together, and to this day, I want to tell you, that was a miraculous job. I don't know how they did it. But they finally did, because if we had to go and dig records out of the attic to put the county records in there, because it's all from a long way. But anyway, the first budget, I remember, it was really, really something to put it together. And the night that thing passed, I was just the most amazed guy in the whole place. And I just didn't think that we would be able to get all that information in, you know. Very few people were working on it. So that was my memory.
Oh, I was too young to remember all that. Actually, I was waiting, so I had finished school and I was waiting service when all this was going on, so. And then I got back in time for my son to be born, as I mentioned. But I got 2 memories since then.
And we'll definitely get to those. Me too.
Councilmember Williams and Davis.
Oh, sorry, I should use my microphone. Any particular memories of the time period around consolidation that perhaps is not something that everybody in the public knows?
One of the things I remember the most is the time that the council put in that first council. Most of the council were putting in 40 and 60-hour weeks on a part-time job to put the 2 governments together. And if you want to talk about fun, it was the justices of the peace back then were all powerful. And then we had to, as a council, calm that down and get those officers under the consolidated government and eventually to eliminate them. They allowed them to run for judge, and if I remember right, it was 2 or 3 of them got elected as judge. And they eventually got this, not the circuit, the county court, and they served in the county court and then were not allowed to run for re-election, as the best I remember. They get away with the JPs being judges. The other thing that I guess I remember the most is these were not politicians that were in there. They were business people like Walter Dickinson here and Wallace Covington had an electric company. If I remember right, Wallace only served 1 term. And I.M. Sulzbacher was just an outstanding council. And in fact, I always remember I.M. because if I was working on something and I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find the I.M., he had a filing system. You could go to his filing system and find anything. And
Zeke McLeod, Forest Lyle.
Yeah. And we went to get that final budget, we didn't get an agreement. And myself and I am and one or two more, I don't remember what. I don't know if you were in there, I think you were in there too, Bob, we were in the office and Bernie Palco said, well, we can't get it done, we leave it.
Yes.
Earl Huntley got up and stood in front of the door and said, we're not leaving until we get this budget agreed to. And he was a rough and tough ex-Marine. Remember that, Bob? And he said, we're not, and they got the budget. And then the reporter from Channel 4 wanted to know what went on in there. We said, we'll let you know later. He said, well, what about Governor Sunshine? We said, what about it? We had
So,
I'll tell you, let me tell you another story.
okay.
All of it's part of this. He's right. Our budget sessions would start in the afternoon and they would go until the wee hours of the morning. And I, Salzbacher, was the chairman of the finance committee and Walter was on it. And one morning about 3 o'clock, we got through with the regular agenda and I pulls out this file that Walter's talking about. And he says, now I want to share with you the correspondence that I've received this week. John Lanahan is on the council. He jumps up and he says, has your wife locked you out of the house? He says, you don't want to go home, do you? And anyway, the finance committee got up and left at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so only Gene McLeod were left, and turned around and he looked at us and he says, boys, I think I lost my committee. So that was one of those late ones.
3 o'clock in the morning is either late or early, I'm not sure which. We are at the beach, so we need to acknowledge that, I think, because after all, we are holding this conversation in a community that chose a different path. So I want to ask whoever would like to speak to this, how important it was for Baldwin and for the beaches to retain their measure of autonomy, and how you think agreeing to that autonomy affected the vote, the implementation of consolidation, and the relationship between Jacksonville and the beaches in Baldwin since that time.
Could we go till 10 o'clock? I think maybe I'm
Not afraid someone said.
I think I may be the appropriate one to take that one. For those in the audience who are not aware of the structure of the original vote, concern on the part of those who were in favor of consolidation and promoted it was the beaches, being independent-minded, would not vote for consolidation because they were independent and thought that would be impacted by the loss of their municipal identity. So there was a second question on the ballot that the beaches involved, namely was if you, in essence, it allowed them to vote for consolidation and to retain their municipal entities, which seemed like a good idea at the time to encourage the vote, but it created a great number of problems because after that, nobody knew what the structure should be. And that led to a court action which prompted a 1982 interlocal agreement. And even that interlocal agreement was not particularly good because it wasn't well defined or specific. In other words, it would say things like animal control. What does that mean? What it ultimately meant was the beaches communities, when I was the mayor of Atlantic Beach, ended up getting their own animal control because we never Jacksonville provided. Then in 1992, the city of Atlantic Beach filed a double taxation suit against the city of Jacksonville over this issue. And at the same time, some of you may remember a movement at the beach called Ocean County. I pulled out one of my old Ocean County t-shirts and wore it a couple of nights ago.
Should have worn it tonight.
Yes, it was pretty good. I should have worn it, but it was dirty. I couldn't wear it tonight. Hadn't been washed yet. I chose not to run for re-election as a mayor, and I kind of was needling that movement, both movements, and we ended up, the beach cities ended up settling when John Delaney became mayor in 1993 3 and 4, we reached a settlement agreement. There was an amendment to the interlocal agreement for each city, which I still to this day can't exactly understand why the people in Neptune Beach and Atlantic Beach pay for tipping fees and the people in Jacksonville Beach do not. Interesting conjecture. The basics of our suit was this. The fundamentals of it was, and I'm glad we got these experts and these folks that have long memories, because there's been something that's been troubling me for a number of years, and that is, how did they arrive at the 18.8% differential that created the millage rate that was charged to the beach? In other words, folks, those of you who are the beach taxpayers, you pay 18.8% less than those in Jacksonville. And that differentiation is to recognize that they are providing county service. I asked Florida Tax Watch to give me a breakdown of 7 counties, most of them are large metropolitan counties in Florida, and what they charge in their incorporated areas or their incorporated parts of their county for county services. In other words, what's the millage rate that they charge? And I took that today and came up with an average. That average was 5.05 mils. Right now, currently last year in Jacksonville, we at the beach were assessed over 8 mils. My contention always was that we were overcharged at least by 2 mils. But again, I go back to the question, the fundamental question. I don't know how 18.8% was arrived. Maybe Mr. Johnson can tell me how that happened, or what but I don't. We still, and that was sort of prompted the lawsuit. Part of what prompted the lawsuit was that we felt like for the services that we were paying too much. And I think you also recognize, because of the high appreciation of property values out here, that probably the per capita contribution is higher at the beach than anywhere else. And I'm not whining. Consolidation's got a lot of good attributes to it, and I'm a proponent to a degree, except for the people that I represent sometimes in arguing that they're not completely treated fairly. I think it was, at the time, I think it was the right thing to do, especially with what the problems that Jacksonville had going. It was severe. But, you know, it started out convoluted. It's gotten a little bit better. Our relationship with Jacksonville is obviously better than it has been. People like John Cressenden have been very supportive. And, but sometimes you feel like it's going to be an 18-1 vote down there, and Elaine and Dick can certainly speak to that. But that's a little bit of history for you. I'd love to hear some other comments about how we got to the 18.8%.
Well, the 18.8 started when, at the time, the 18.8, Jacksonville, the city of Jacksonville Beach was the one that led the charge on that one. And the county millage was 12 point something, and the beaches was 10 point something. And the only reason the beaches was at 10 point something was because there was some geo debt service on it. So they got the differential between the two, which was 18.8 at that time, and that's what it was settled on initially. Another one you can talk about is how that new one was arrived at. The differential now, it went from 18, I think you determined that it was equal to 1.7907, and now the differential is 3.2907 mils between one and the two. Now that was done, even Mayor Delaney said that was done on the table in Atlantic Beach between the Atlantic Beach mayor and John Delaney. And that's the way that formula came about.
And that sounds like a fascinating short story and footnote to a short story. So decimal points and millage rates. And I have a question about millage rates in a bit too, but I want to try, for the sake of time, to keep things general too. Mr. Carlucci, you had something to say.
What I wanted to say is, by the way, Bill, I have some great reading material on the interlocal agreements, and it's pretty complicated. But the beaches were doing fine. The problem was Jacksonville. The problem was the inner city of Jacksonville, Florida, was going broke. In 1950, the city population, the inner city population, the city limits, was 204,000 with a budget of $23 million. 15 years later, the budget went from 23 to $94 million, and the population had actually dropped. That's what the problem was, that the old city limits was going bankrupt. Duplication of city services. So again, I'm kind of back on the other side of the intercoastal at this point. We had a county planning department, a city planning department, a county recreation department, a city recreation department, the county road patrol, city police department, and it just went on and on and on, and there was no requirement for these two different governments, county and city, to work together, to plan together. No requirement. See, guess what? They didn't. But what they did do was steal a lot of money. What they did do was waste a lot of money. And then you have on top of that, and the council doesn't really have much to do with schools, but it compounded the crisis at the time. We had we had all of our high schools were disaccredited, like that. And then when you look at the river, and I alluded to that earlier, there were 600 million gallons of untreated raw sewage flowing in the St. Johns River. The U.S. News and World Report called it a flowing cesspool. And so when you had all of these crises happening at one time, Jacksonville had to come to grips and do something about it. And civic leaders came together, and the elected officials did. And, you know, it's like Councilman Gulliver said, most of the people were for consolidation, some were not. Through the anniversary we had here, no voices have been silenced because the conversation still goes on. You can argue the goods and the bads of consolidation, but I'll tell you this, I don't think 50 years ago we could have ever imagined where we would be today. But I say all of that to say this, part of the reason that the beaches needs us and we need the beaches, but they weren't in trouble. The city was, so we had to find a way to live together, and that involved the city providing some county services to the beaches area. And so therefore, there had to be interlocal agreements made. And I was in on the local agreement with Atlantic Beach when you were mayor of Atlantic Beach, and it was quite a show. But
I remember Warren Jones and Chuck Farnell coming down to meet with us, and that was quite a show too.
Well, Councilman Gulliver, I have learned his love in the speeches because I think he's fought so hard for the beaches and for Atlantic Beach. And so it's very hard to explain the interlocal agreements, and so I'm going to kind of gloss over them because we could be here till 10 tomorrow to talk about it. But the bottom line is Jacksonville was having the problems, not Baldwin and not the beaches. The beaches have always enjoyed their independence, but you know, sometimes they need us. But like Conley said, does Jacksonville need the beaches? So we try to form these interlocal agreements and work out a compromise as best as possible. They're not easy, but they get done eventually. And so you kind of got your beach city, so y'all get to vote that live out, y'all that live out here at the beach, you get to vote for 2 mayors, we get to vote for 1 back in Jacksonville.
Right. Which would be a fascinating question in and of itself to talk about.
Yeah.
Consolidation is so complicated, there's so many facets of it. I want to move to several of them if we can. And I also want to encourage some of our other panel members that maybe I haven't given enough time to. But I want to move, actually, based, Mr. Carlucci, on what you just said, to first discussing the county itself and suburban communities that were at the time new and at the time outside of the city limits. And then I'd like to move to talking about the so-called old city, which, you know, now we often call the urban core. Here's the question I'd like to put to you. By now, lots of studies have been done, books have been written about the post-World War II suburban expansion. Of course, we're looking 50 years back now, we're not looking forward from 1968. Often the suburban expansion is called white flight. Lots of studies and books have been written about the policies that enabled it, policies including redlining and banking and insurance, racial restrictions in suburban communities, urban policy around new interstate construction, ongoing issues of school desegregation, etc. So I want to focus this question on the suburbs that were originally outside of the old city. In most metropolitan areas, not all of them, but the faster the suburbs grew, the more the urban tax base declined, the heavier the burdens on core cities became, and the more left behind and betrayed those in the inner city felt. How do you feel suburban areas at the time, outside of what was the city, we now call the old city, would have fared if Jacksonville and Duval had not consolidated, but had perhaps some other way reformed their admittedly Byzantine governmental structures? In metropolitan areas where city and county have not consolidated most of the time, the suburbs seem to have done just fine. So what do you guys say?
53% of people who live in Florida live outside of incorporated areas. Look at St. Johns County, and that percentage will go from county to county. St. John's is a very high percentage of their county residents live outside of incorporated areas. I think one of the failures, not failures, one of the things that was not anticipated with consolidation was that suddenly, by consolidating, people outside the normal core city suddenly expected services at a level that you would normally expect in the city, and that was very expensive and continues to be a very expensive thing to do. And so you now, instead of running a garbage service in a pretty tight area where you're going from this house, this house, now all of a sudden that garbage truck is making a stop every quarter mile. And that becomes a little more expensive to operate in that environment. And that's one thing that I have noticed, what you were saying. I think it would have just evolved, as you said. I think your urban core would have collapsed even more.
And I have questions about that too.
Yeah, and I think you've seen basically fundamentally what you're seeing in the south part of Duval County, north part of North St. Johns County. They would have evolved accordingly.
What about Representative Councilman Bastard? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, just short, and I hope this doesn't digress from the current flow of the conversation, but I was in the legislature back during the 60s, and our delegation, we didn't have the sunshine always, so, but we had a very collegial delegation, even though there was a spread. George Stallings certainly was the conservative member, I'm sure, and but we worked together very well. It was a very collegial group, and there had been some discussion about fiscal responsibility and duplication of offices, such as the tax collector and the property appraiser. And we had a 1935 state amendment that allowed for consolidation of governments set up like the Daughtry Towers over some dispute they were having about law enforcement between the elected sheriff and the appointed chief of police. And I had openly talked about consolidating the tax collector, property appraiser, and I made some casual mentions of law enforcement. But anyway, along came the Yates Manifesto calling for consolidated government and things. So we started working on it, and they dumped it on me to put a study committee statute together. And I checked and found that Nashville had done it, but they had something like 50 or 57 council members, and I didn't think Jacksonville would be very amenable to that. And then there was a Tampa-Hillsborough vote at one time, and Terrell Sessions was a member of the legislature that I knew from the University of Florida, who had been president of the student body, and his brother and I had been close in politics there. And so I talked to Terrell about what they did, and he helped me with it, and we started an open discussion, thinking more along the terms of what these other two towns have done and going in opposite directions. And we were able to get some good discussion going in the delegation, and then they sort of told me to get the draft together for them to consider, and we did. And there were some changes made. One I recall was Tommy Green recommended that we each have so many appointments to the study committee, and that seemed to be adaptable, and some other stuff we've done. I had worked on the Port Authority bill and been assigned to work that up, and so anyway, what we ended up with was we had each appointed 7 members to the study committee, and 2 of mine, strangely enough, went in opposite directions during the consolidation proposition when it went to a vote of the people in '68. And so Earl Johnson, I had put on there as the secretary of the executive committee, the study commission, and I had Bill Birchfield on there, and then we unanimously agreed on president, chairman of the executive committee, put the final thing out there. And so we got that passed. In fact, Jack Matthews, our senator at the time, who was a great guy, introduced it to the Senate. And we had good support, of course. And then we had that study committee put together, and they came up with what is essentially what we have today, in the form of government. Well, penny pinching me, I wasn't too happy about the size, because I was advocating more for saving the taxpayer money rather than enlarging. I knew a larger government would do that, so I didn't get on board to support the final vote. And as you know, that went very much against me. And I was at the time, by that time, I was chairman of the county commission. But I wasn't one of the thieves in the old government. Well, after I got out of office in '87, I served as the interim after the property appraiser got indicted. The governor, Bob Graham, wanted me to fill out the term. And after that, I was sitting in my office one day, happily kicked out of politics probably because I could practice law for a change. And this guy came over named Rick Beasler and said he'd like to see me. So the secretary got me to take him in, and she didn't know what he wanted, and I didn't know what he wanted. And he says, well, it's not, when I asked him what I could do for him, he says, it's not what you can do for me, it's what I can do for you. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm here to apologize. And I said, apologize for what? And he said, well, I'm the chief investigator for the state attorney's office. I said, oh my God, what have I done now? And he says, and we had a list of working up people we might charge or indict. And he said, and when I didn't see your name on the list, I asked my boss why your name wasn't on the list. And he says, because you won't get anything on it. He said, I'll bet I can. And so his boss gave him unlimited authority, but his boss also told him, said, when you lose the vote, when you lose your bet with me, you have to go to Vassar and apologize for his face. And I said, you think you're the guy that chases down the mail lady and checking all the court records and any property I own or anything else? He said, yeah, I am. And I said, you know, and I thanked his boss for letting him do it, because I've got someone still alive today that could prove it. Well, I moved to Clay County because I knew no one would elect me anything out there. I was so addicted to it. It was financially suffering. And so one day this Beasler comes by my office, and I didn't know. He said, well, he says, I just want you be one of the first ones to know that I'm running for sheriff down here, and I don't want you against me. And I said, are you here for money? And he said, well, I won't turn it down if you will. So I gave him a little money. And he retired this past time, and we elected
So
sheriff.
So all of that's great, but I'm wondering, how do you think that the suburbs outside the old city would have fared?
Nobody wants to talk about this much, but there was a certain amount of racism involved in the final vote.
Really?
Because Jacksonville was going to have a black government.
Okay.
No question that the minority would eventually be able to elect people to what they wanted, instead of sitting on the sidelines and suffering for it. And so they didn't want Jacksonville to become a black
control goes. So I have questions about that too, but does that mean that the suburbs, those...
They didn't want Jacksonville to be black government.
And they would have fared okay, you think, if consolidation had not happened?
Well,
Mr. Gollifer is shaking his
I
nodding.
don't think it's any question that, like you mentioned, Matt mentioned that Earl Johnson could have easily been first
Okay.
black mayor.
And I want to come to that in just a second. What about council members Williams or Dickinson? Do you have any thoughts about how the suburbs, the communities outside of the old city would have done if consolidation did not happen?
Well, I represented the beaches,
Uh-huh.
and it was a pleasure doing that. I had a stroke this year, it hurt my mind, and I lost my balance, but I can't remember a lot of things, but we did have a good government, and I really enjoyed my beaches.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Garland.
Well, the question that you asked, first I want to say, it's an honor for me to be here with so many people that my dad worked with. And I respect each and every one of these gentlemen. After my daddy worked with Councilman Gold.
I was mentioning you.
But
You keep saying it.
you might have been.
I'm reinforcing something.
I've been fortunate to work with Councilman Gulliver as well, but I wanted to say that because this government was built, they're not perfect, but Mr. Dickinson, Mr. Williams, Mr. Basford, and some of the others that built this government, so much of the structure is still there that we use to this day. Now, to answer your question, this is how did the suburbs fare compared to the city? We might not ever know the answer to that question. Earl Johnson is one of the great stories of city government in Jacksonville. He was a black civil rights lawyer. He represented Martin Luther King. He studied under Thurgood Marshall. He was the lawyer for the desegregation cases in Jacksonville and in Florida. And he's got a storied background. Everybody reckoned and knew that he would be the first mayor of pre-consolidated Jacksonville had we not consolidated. And I don't know the quote exactly, but I can tell you the spirit of his quote. And his quote at the time was, "We need to do not what's just best for the black community. We need to do what's best for the entire community." Boy, could we use statesmanship like that again in this whole wide world. And I'm going to tell you, Earl Johnson, and we're going to tell a story about Earl Johnson this Monday night. But I wanted to say that about Earl Johnson because he and Sally Mathis, they were the two strongest. And when my wife and I got married, Sally was so dear, and she gave my wife the Bible. And we still have that Bible to this day. But I want to, this is what I want to say. If we had not consolidated, we still had the old city, whatever color leadership, in the county, whatever color leadership. See, before consolidation, we didn't have any one person who spoke for Jacksonville. But when we went to consolidated government, we had what they call a strong mayoral form of government. Now, that's not to suggest that the council's weak and can't, play its role on the legislative side. But suddenly, we had somebody where the buck kind of stopped. So, Hans Tansler could speak to the whole city. And what his legacy was cleaning up the St. Johns River. And then Jay Godbold spoke to the whole community and said, we need to do something with downtown. Not everything worked out, but he had the right idea. And he was a cheerleader for Jacksonville. And he brought 50,000 crazy football fans in the middle of the Gator Bowl. Y'all remember that. And when Baltimore Colts came and Buddy Irsay jumped out of a helicopter. But see, we never had this before consolidation because we didn't have one strong voice. So after Godbold, then came Tommy Azzurri. He spoke to the community, he says, we've got to do something about the odor in the air, we've got to do something about the tolls. He eliminated that. But he was able to, but he had to go to the whole community and talk to the whole community. And then from Tommy, you went to John Delaney. Ed Austin, I'm sorry. Ed Austin, well, okay, River City Renaissance, that the city finally started to give a little money, and we had River City Renaissance. And that was the 25th year of consolidation. And he built, he redid the old Gator Bowl and made some vast improvements in the downtown and in the suburbs areas, in water and sewer. But he also got the Jaguars here. Okay, then you move forward from Ed Austin, then to John Payton. No, John Delaney. John Delaney, we got a lot of mayors, I'm telling you, a lot of them are John. It's hard to keep up with them. So John Delaney, he gets into office, and of course what he's known for is the Better Jacksonville plan, which is one of those vast improvements of Jacksonville's infrastructure and the arena, the library, courthouse. I say that lightly because that was a popular project, but the state requires counties to build their own courthouse. But the Better Jacksonville plan made Jacksonville a better place. And then after him, John Payton, and John Payton, unfortunately, the economy started to dip on John, but John had to do some tough decisions and raising some taxes, because you cannot run a city over cheap. Sometimes you've got to raise some taxes to take care of public health and welfare. And he had the courage to do that. And he also did the Jacksonville Journey. And then after John Payton came Alvin Brown, I think. Alvin was one term. Nobody in our history came from so little to become a mayor of a big city like Jacksonville, like Alvin Brown did. And he was a good man. Alvin brought a lot of excitement to Jacksonville. He brought the Downtown Investment Authority. He brought some improvements to the Brooklyn area. So he had some things that he did, but he was struggling with not much money. And then he did not get reelected. Lenny Curry got elected. He went to the community, the delegation first, with his considerable influence in Tallahassee, and was able to put on the ballot the half-cent sales tax to eliminate, or to eventually eliminate, our unfunded liability for the pension. I say all that to say this: you could have never done that for consolidation, and pre-consolidation, I don't know if we would have had the Jaguars. I don't know if we would have had a lot of those things that I was talking about.
So you've anticipated a couple of my other questions, and I want to give everybody a chance, but I also want to get to. I'll get your point, but real quickly. So the reason for my asking that question about the county that was at the time of consolidation outside the old city is because most metropolitan areas did not choose consolidation. And not all of them, but most of them, the suburbs have done, well, pretty well. So I wanted to ask about that before I asked about the effects on the core city. But I think one thing that what you said really highlights is that at the time when so much was wrong in the 1960s, schools disaccredited, all of our waterways full of raw sewage. I mean, the city, frankly, stunk. It had to have felt like only a really dramatic step can make us feel any better about ourselves.
Like moving to the beach.
Like moving to the beach. So I want to get your point, and then I have to, for the sake of time, and to get some other questions in, I have to shift real quick.
Yeah, this is a quick point. Talking about the football team, the other thing was, and this happened right at consolidation, and it was the most important thing we had going, and that was all the pollution we had in Walter and
Yes.
Bill Basketball. Remember, what happened was is along came the Federal Clean Water Act. And we had hundreds, well, not hundreds, but we had tons of private water and sewer utilities all over town. And we needed to address that because it was all in the river. And so what we did was, we applied to the federal government and we found out that we could get 75 cents on every dollar that we spent to clean up the utility, clean up the city. So what we did is we went out and bought just about every utility in town. We paid through the nose for some of them, more than we should have. But in addition to that, we created these regional water and sewer treatment plants, which we have today. And that's the big reason we were able to clean that up. That was one of the main features that we had going. And Hans Stanford often said that, you know, all mayors build something to themselves, but the thing that he built while he was mayor was all would be underground because it was water and sewer treatment plants. But it was very, very important that we collectively have access to that federal money at that time.
So,
I want to comment on.
okay,
Right.
real quickly. Yes.
When I became president of City Council, the go-to man that I found and contributed so much along the way to the fiscal responsibility of this community, and someone that I knew would tell me the truth about what was going on with the budgets and the money was spent and stuff like that. And that was through the years. And of course, his follow-up was Richard Wallace, who also did a good job. But Bob Johnson has played a bigger part in all of this than people normally would even care about. But he was there. He's embarrassing. I apologize.
So look, I think we also have to acknowledge that historical forces are complicated, governmental forces are complicated. We can talk about what happens locally, governmentally, but we also talk about national, federal initiatives and state initiatives and changes in the culture, changes in the culture about how people think about the environment, about race, different things like that. And I want to come back to Missouri and the smell of the city and so on in a minute, but I don't want to go there yet. I want to just focus on a question at a time. This is going to be the most uncomfortable question that I have for you guys. And you've all pretty much anticipated it. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the way that consolidation has been criticized, rightly or wrongly, and questioned more than any other concern, and I think that has to do with race relations. A number of community members actually contacted me personally about this topic in the last week. This past week, the Times-Union's Matt Sorgel wrote about Earl Johnson, who Mr. Carlucci mentioned earlier, about his role in consolidation. Of course, Earl Johnson supporting consolidation at the time of the vote. There's long been a sentiment in the black community, the majority of which I recognize did vote for consolidation, that Johnson might have been mayor if consolidation had not occurred, and a feeling that consolidation diluted black political power. Sorgel writes, Johnson acknowledged that in the troubled 1960s, he had thought that a majority black Jacksonville would struggle to succeed, but times had changed, and perhaps he thought a black city would have turned out just fine. In the early 1990s, at a UNF conference, Betty Holzendorf directly stated, quoting her, where she was coming from, that consolidation had made things worse for the black community. Even more pointedly, there's this quote from Nate Monroe's Times-Union story this last week that I know we all saw. Former mayor, and he's quoting Pastor R.L. Gundy. Lou Ritter was sitting in my office. I said, Lou, they consolidated this government to keep blacks out of power. He said, Gundy, you're right. However, each of you wants to discuss this point. I think it's incumbent upon us that we recognize this panel contains no black representation, and appreciate Johnson's statement, quote, I don't think the white counterpoint of Earl Johnson quite understands the black experience. I've said all that. recognize that consolidation was and remains deeply complicated, and I'm going to ask you about other components of it as well. But this prompt does represent perhaps consolidation's biggest negative perception, and I think perhaps a perception that has grown since 1968. Having said all of that, who wants to go first? Yes. Yes.
We had 19 city councilmen and 4 were black.
True.
And I can't remember all their names. And then we had Tommy Missouri, who took the tolls off the roads.
Yes. And Sally Mathis supported consolidation, and Mary Singleton opposed consolidation.
I sat next to Mary Singleton.
Yeah, right. Yes, Mr. Cullen.
I want to start off by reminding everybody here that in the time that I've sat on the council, we have elected 2 black members to the city council at large. Think about that. 2 times. And I think that made a strong statement to the community. And I think in a lot of ways we are moving in the right direction. Are there still problems? Absolutely. I mean, I see it in the core city as a problem. Years ago, when I was selling, I had a construction equipment business, and we sold a particular brand of equipment that was utilized by counties and cities. And I remember riding, we sold one to Gaston County north of Tallahassee, and I was riding with the chairman of the county commission when we delivered the machine. He was telling me his biggest problem in that county was that 70% of the residential properties were not on the tax rolls because of homestead exemption. If you think about what would have happened had the core city had there not been consolidation, I'd submit to you that I think it would have been worse off than it is today. Because I think, frankly, the revenue would not have been there to support the need, because you have to look and realize that in the core city, typically your property values are more depressed. Consequently, I think you would have a large and substantial number of properties that would be paying no property tax. And of course, we know that that's the case. Now,
and that actually was happening, and was part of what led to
exactly
high schools being discredited.
Sure. And at that time, remember, I can remember folks riding on a bus when I was in high school where black people still sat in the back of the bus. It always confounded me. I never quite understood that as a young kid growing up. You were just coming out of segregation. I mean, it wasn't that far back before consolidation came along. It was still a mindset, let's be real. Absolutely, there was a mindset in the community still, and had the other component of that, had you not done something and had you evolved to a black-led government, I think you've seen even more white flight outside of the core city, further making it more difficult to have the revenues necessary to prop city up. You've seen that repeated in other metropolitan areas throughout the country. I mean, Detroit is the one that jumps out at you immediately, but I don't think that you can absolutely say that consolidation was detrimental to the core. I think it's an issue unto itself, the urban core. And I can tell you something else, folks. This is an issue for the whole community, what's going on in the urban core, because the crime, there's no barriers, except maybe the ditch out here. There are no barriers to keep bad people limited to the urban core. And we're starting to see that more and more, and we're hearing about it in other metropolitan cities like Atlanta, about what's happening out in the suburbs as far as the spread of crime. It's not just an urban core problem, it's a city problem.
I'd like to
take any questions.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, we will, absolutely. But I'd like to follow that up real quickly to, again, note that we have no black representation on this panel, and ask if we can kind of try to think about where Earl Johnson was coming from at that time, where Betty Holtendorf was coming from, where perhaps black community members now who feel this way about consolidation are coming from. And I also want to address the fact that nationally there is a trend that young people are moving back into the cities, and Jacksonville is a little bit behind on that. It's certainly not as far ahead as cities in the Pacific Northwest, or even Portland, Maine, or Austin, Texas, or a number of other places. But, you know, everything about the urban core being negative is really kind of 25 years behind where a lot of young people are now. But Mr. Carlucci.
Well, Earl Johnson Jr. can speak to this issue better than anybody. In Jacksonville, we have a task force on the 50th anniversary consolidation, and I co-chair, and Earl co-chairs. And so that's diversity right there. And one of the things that we did, because of the very issue you're talking about, and what Bill Bassford talked about, there was a slice of this community that did not want black leadership in the city. And you cannot deny that happened. But I think it was a slice. It was not the whole piece of the puzzle because of the crisis. It kept coming back to this. The city needed to consolidate because they had to recapture all of the ad valorem taxes that were going out to the county that had left the city. And so, no matter what you would have done, the core was going down. So I'm not sure they had really much of a choice. I think that's one of the reasons Earl Johnson made the comment like he did. And I will say there's nobody that doesn't sometimes, well, there's a lot of people that don't pay attention to government at all, and I get that. But people that do, and students of government, will oftentimes think about, you know, was consolidation the best way, or could it have been done better? There's pluses and minuses. I think the pluses outweigh the minuses. But in Jacksonville, when we put this task force together, we went and we got the involvement of the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the Jacksonville Urban League, and they have played a big role. No voices have been silenced. Because I said earlier, if the conversation goes on, you should never silence voices. First of all, we all know that. But even if you try, the conversation is still going to go on. And so, you know, I noticed that too. There's no black members up here. But I did want to say in Jacksonville, we have worked hard to include the black membership of our community. And one other thing I think that needs to be said, and this is not elective, but it's an important part of being mayor in Jacksonville, is your appointment ability, the power of appointment. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this mayor, Lenny Curry, has more department heads that are from the black community and more black appointees, at least, than any mayor, I think, henceforth. And so that speaks to the reaching out to try to make our city government more reflective of what the whole community looks like. And but I should have given my spot up to Earl Johnson because I'll tell you, nobody can tell the story like Earl Johnson Jr. can, other than maybe his daddy, Earl Johnson Sr. But I think your point's well taken, and that is a point of sensitivity in the community. And
let me ask this follow-up, and then we'll switch gears. And that is, I'd like to know how people on the panel think about basic services on, let's say, the northwest side of Jacksonville compared to communities that would have been outside the old city, let's say, you know, Mandarin or the area around St. John's Town Center, and what your thoughts are.
Somebody might say we just have crummy services everywhere, you know. We get complaints, John, and I can talk to you about garbage service, and we get complaints from all over the
Those people probably don't live on the northwest side, though.
Yeah, well, exactly, but I mean, we get it, it's widespread, and that's an issue to itself that's manifested itself lately. I mean, we have a significant problem with septic tanks, but when you look at the map of the city, locating all the septic tanks in the city, you suddenly realize it's not just a Northwest Jacksonville problem. You find it in Mandarin, you find it at the intersection of University and Atlantic, all that area around there, those neighborhoods, all on septic tanks. Big problem, $200 million problem to fix it. I think that there's been a focus by this county to try to enhance services in the Northwest Quadrant. I think that when Denise Lee headed up that light committee, we all recognized that picking up litter in the Northwest part of the community was more important than picking up litter maybe in the Mandarin area. Because you're trying to make an impression, and that's important. But it's still a significant problem. We recognize it. You know what else is interesting? I don't know how many of y'all know what Durkeeville is. Durkeeville was a predominantly African American middle class neighborhood. And you could, poor now, but not then. Not back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, because this is where professional African Americans who were professional and who were business owners lived.
It was also the site, though, of one of the city's first public housing projects. So there was significant poverty in the area.
That was not the
No.
public housing
No,
project.
that was not, no, you're not right
Let
about
me
that.
explain on that.
Yeah.
That was a project
Hang on.
built- that
But
was
let me
not a
finish.
public housing project.
Right. Let me finish about Durkeeville, because I've spent time in Durkeeville.
Sure.
If you took the housing stock of Durkeeville and dropped it down in San Marco, I guarantee you would sell those houses very easily, because they were very well-built houses. And so Durkeeville was a pretty nice neighborhood up through the 60s. And then in the 70s, it started to decline. And why? It might have been a byproduct to some degree of integration. The kids, these professional and business owners sent their kids off to college, and the kids came back, parents expected them, well, you're going to move back into the neighborhood. No, I'm not. I'm going to move to Mandarin, I'm going to move here, I'm going to move there. So suddenly these houses ended up, the parents were deceased, the kids get them, they're living in Atlanta, they don't want to, they try to rent them, the neighborhood starts to decline. Jim Overton put on a little session at Dallas Graham Library that I attended several years ago, and a number of Durkeeville residents there, and I still remember one lady showing me how much her property value her assessed value had declined over about a 10-year period. See, it started that momentum as far as the neighborhood in decline, and even though the housing stocks were good and still are good, it was the complexion of the neighborhood that changed and went from home ownership to heavy rental, slumlords and the like, and that just caused the decline to go even greater. And you see that repeated, but it's more vivid in Durkeeville than anywhere else in the Northwest Quadrant, I think.
But,
How do you turn it around?
but there's also the perception in the poor areas of Jacksonville, both white and black. And I can remember driving over and meeting with a group at 44th and Boulevard. And I got out of my truck, and there was about 15 people there, and I spoke with them. I said, tell me what you think about Jacksonville. Well, see, just to make a long story short, they felt disconnected. They did not feel that Jacksonville was reaching out to them. And I said, well, what about that illegal dumping down there? Have you ever called 630 City? And they said, nah, we don't call it, they won't do nothing about it. And so I called 630 City when I left. I came back a week later, it was gone. But it's the perception. Sure. And it's the reality. But there's a lot of perceptions there. We've got to do a better job of reaching and gaining trust in those areas that if we say we want to do something, we want to do it. And battling perception is probably the hardest thing for an elected official or a mother or father or anybody who's leading an organization to do. Perception is hard to overcome. And but here's the thing. There are services that we name that are needed in the urban core, the Northwest Quadrant, and we need to be able to do two things at one time. We need, and I hope this is what happens after October 1st, that we will regain that civic pride that the gentlemen like Walter Dickinson, Walter Williams, Bill Basford, Bob Johnson, these giants who built this consolidated government, and we will go back and we will correct those problems, but we can still reach into the future to make this a greater city. We can do two things at one time. We can do that. We've done it before. And so, there's a truth to what you're talking about, and it needs correction, it needs a writing of the course. But there's a lot of things that have been done that just can't quite break through that perception that were done in the Better Jacksonville Plan, River City Renaissance, and so forth. So it's complicated. It's very, and it takes communication.
Yeah.
It takes communication.
And so, you know, I want to express that, you know, people's perceptions, depending on where they are, what their lives are, what their worldviews are, you know, I want to try to fairly represent different kinds of perceptions from the community in these questions. And, you know, there are plenty of people in our community who would say that, you know, I should be asking much harder questions than I am. So I just want to acknowledge that. I do want to say, so Mr. Carlucci has mentioned a couple times the event on October 1st. So there is this event. You want to tell us about that real quickly at the Hayden Burns Library?
Real quickly, and I think Mr.
Actually, just Duval County Center now.
He wants to say, and I don't want to get away with that, but October 1st at the old Hayden Burns Library, which is now the Duval County building, it's been cleaned up, it's beautiful, and Steve's going to hand out some invitations, and I just would like to invite everybody. There's going to be free valet parking, there's going to be a free public event, and it's going to be, I think, a very touching and very inspirational time. And then you'll get to hear Earl Johnson speak. I'll tell you, he is one of the great orators I've ever heard. And Rick Mulaney, good. Rick Mulaney, how many Brits have heard Rick Mulaney talk before? He's a great orator. But he's kind of like a machine. Right away, and he's very quick. You know, Earl Johnson's like a violin. You know, he's slow, but he picks up the right words and the right notes. He's a wonderful young man. I think young man, he's 53. That's young. That's real young. But I hope that y'all, I just wanted to make sure that you had an invite. If you'd like to come, just RSVP by the phone number or email in this group, and I think people will enjoy it.
So let me switch directions here. Okay, a couple of you have talked about Mayor Missouri's administration and what that administration did for, well, the air in Jacksonville. How many of you guys, curious, how many people in the audience remember when maybe Jacksonville didn't smell so good, right? So I want to use that to ask a more general question that can be answered a number of different ways, and that is, and again, I would like to spread the discussion out amongst our panel. But how has consolidation affected how this metropolitan area deals with environmental issues? Maybe, I don't know, Mr. Bastard, would you like to start us off with it?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm down on Doctor's Lake, and we have lots of algae bloom down there. But I think the central effort is trying to do what they can to go in the right direction. The one thing about it, having a powerful mayor, council, of course, is there with the purse strings. That's one of the good things. And but there are so many issues that you just can't wave a magic wand and say you can do it. And this environmental thing, I like to see that we have a Hannah Park and we have the parks around Jacksonville that are still, and to drive by Fletcher a while ago and see all the kids out there playing soccer and the families involved and everything. I was very impressed. And those are pleasant moments. I'm 88 years old. I was born in 1930, so I went through all this. I went to the Navy in my senior year in high school and was going to hell in a handbasket. And a cousin from World War II steered me into the Navy. And I got my GED and started junior college even before. In fact, my son left. He was here when I was born in '52. My oldest boy in '51, so they were born when I was in the Navy, and I got out in '52 right after the Korean Day. That's why I've been so addicted to politics. It hit me hard as a kid with my dad in college at the University of Florida. But I was born in Jacksonville, in a rather poor community over banked up in Beaver in that area. And my involvement with interracial things came early in my life. We played in a field back there where some of the black kids, 2 blocks to the dividing line on Canal Street there, and us, because nobody could afford a football, we used to grind up cow dung, and the guy that caught a pass usually, suffering through that. But it just, life was real for me, and I joined the Navy to see the world, of course, and I ended up being shipped in as Jackson. It's once a time to get for it.
You came full circle.
Yes,
I wonder.
but I love my Jacksonville, and I only moved to Clay County, like I told you, because I knew not enough people knew me and liked me anything.
Well, your secret's out.
When I see the algae and
Better move back to Jacksonville, we don't have algae around here.
yeah, that's right.
What about
Send it all down to St. John's to us. But,
Mr. Williams, Mr. Dickinson, do you guys have thoughts about how consolidation affected how we deal with environmental issues? Whether that be, the state of the river at the time, or the state of the air, on into Mr. Hazuri's administration. Okay. Right. Okay. Now let's start with, I don't want anybody to feel like they're not included. Any other thoughts?
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to hog this, but Matt and I were talking about, we seem to be dominant, we're not trying to be, but of course, the closeness to it. Lori Boyer told me yesterday that there was a race in the St. John's River. It's some sponsored event that goes to a bunch of different venues. It was this weekend. As part of the race, they have to test water quality. She said our water quality report came back incredibly good. Much better than a lot of other venues that they swim in or other places around the country. I think sometimes it's a matter of perception, just like downtown's unsafe. But when you look at it statistically, it's not. The water quality in St. John's River is obviously much better. Is that attributable to consolidation? Well, maybe to a degree with respect to the formation of independent authorities to address specific issues. Now, you may have warm feelings about JEA or not so warm feelings about JEA, but I think the consolidation of the water and sewer systems under JEA's management and operation was probably a good move, a strong move, and led to better water quality, better air quality as a consequence. And I think that the whole structure, and these gentlemen know better, Bob Johnson and all of them that were involved, the whole formation of independent authorities. Again, while we might have some difficulties with them currently, the theory behind it seems to work pretty doggone well, and has worked pretty well, and I think the results are obvious when you look at reports like Lori Board was talking about.
Yeah. So we're getting kind of close on time. I have 2 quick questions I want to ask, and then I want to open it to the audience for a minute. But Mr. Crowley, you wanted to make a point.
Well, just real quickly, the stem of the river is in pretty good shape, except down where it does have algae blooms. And we do get them in Duval County too, at times, when it's hot and so forth. But where the water quality problems are so prevalent is in our tributaries. The tributaries are the problems, and that's usually they are on the first receiving end of the failing septic tanks. I think this council in particular, Councilman Gulliver's council and Boyer and President Benny have done a good job of addressing and getting in place septic tank remediation. I think in the next 10 years, you will see Jacksonville be a completely different city in terms of its water quality in its tributaries. It just hasn't taken place yet. Now, one other little thing. You can run a water line down a city street, but then the city pays for that. But then the people that live on that street have to pay to hook up. Well, you know, everybody wants to get rid of their septic tank, but then when they have to hook up, it can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 to hook up. So that is where sometimes the rub is. And there are solutions that this present council has come up with to make that easier to hook up. But, and I believe that those solutions will work. I think 10, 15 years from now, our river will be even cleaner because the tributaries are being addressed.
Okay, we'll ask you about that in 15 years. This is a question comes from the community, two-part. One of the selling points for consolidation was greater governmental efficiency. Obviously, the governmental structures that it replaced were, at best, cumbersome, and at worst, nourished corruption and cronyism. Unless anybody wants to take exception to that, it's doubtful, but, you know, perhaps. But here's a question from this individual. It's actually a couple parts to it. Did consolidation actually lower the cost of government? That's the first part. What costs did consolidation accrue, which actually a couple of you have mentioned earlier, such as extending sewage and public utilities, urban renewal programs, etc. And this is word for word from this individual from the community. How could you ever answer these questions, since so many mayoral administrations have consistently lowered millage rates?
How was that Rob Johnson?
Yes, I think that would be the perfect person to start with that.
Take that one before you quit, please.
What's that?
First of all, somebody mentioned it was smart. You know, this duplication, the duplication of services was very, very evident. You know, you had two tax collectors, you had two property appraisers, you had a city police department, you had a sheriff's office. You had many, many duplications in the county and city government. And there's no question in my mind that we had a lot of savings from just that. And but you know, there have been many, many attempts, and you can come up with numbers that, you know, like if you go to a county that has a city and a county like Tampa tried to consolidate, but they didn't because they couldn't see the efficiencies of it. I think that anybody who has ever, and we've had many, many cities come to our city since we consolidated, and they all went away with a real good feeling about it. But as far as just putting numbers, I just think there's no question in my mind that it's been much more efficient in government. And the thing about it is where the efficiencies come in too, is in dealing with governmental agencies, the federal government. You know, and getting the grants and everything. I mean, cities and counties fight each other all the time. You take in Broward County's got 27 cities. They're forever suing each other and suing the counties. Dade County's got 39 cities, and they're forever. They've got that Park Metro, but they're always suing each other. And we don't have it. The only problem we have is with the beaches, and I hope we should.
The beaches.
Well, wait 2 seconds for him.
I'm ready to rock and roll again.
What about the last part of that question, which, and this is word for word from an individual from the community. It says, how can you ever answer these questions since so many mayoral administrations have consistently lowered millage rates? What about that?
I don't see the correlation on that.
No,
I think the thinking, and this is reflected in Jim Crooks's book, Jacksonville, the Consolidation Story as well, is that, government costs money and that millage rates have consistently gone down. That's not my argument, I'm just putting it to you guys.
Well, wait a minute. If you're confusing efficiency with cost, you really can't do that. I would agree with Bob, it's more efficient, but as that point I made earlier, when suddenly the consolidated government was faced with providing municipal services in the county environment, their cost of operation for that particular activity went up. So you may make an argument for efficiency. What's the measuring stick for cost? Well, I would submit to you that certainly a big one is property taxes. If you look around the state and you combine the property tax assessment in Orange County and add it to the city of Orlando, the millage that they charge, you find out that their combined millage is lower than the millage rate that we're charging in Jacksonville right now. Not much, but a little bit. But there are other factors too. For instance, we get a significant contribution from JEA each year that represents a couple of mills in value, and they get other sources of revenue. That's why you can't make an exact comparison just based on property tax comparisons. But I think it's more efficient. I think if we sold it as a real cost savings, that was inaccurate.
Oh, interesting, okay. Any follow-up to that?
I would just add one thing, and that is, in some of the years I was on the council, we reduced the millage rate, and Councilman Overton can talk to this very well because he was the property appraiser. But because growth was going on and property taxes were going up on people's homes, we were able to reduce the millage rate, still get more money, and there was a lot of pressure to do that. But as I look at it now, and I think most council members and mayors back in those days would probably admit that was a nice luxury to have, but it wasn't very forward-thinking because you cannot build a city on the cheap. And I can qualify this because anytime I run for office, I've never run on a new tax pledge because you never know when you might need a tax to leverage something great for the city, like the Jaguars maybe. Or you may run into an emergency like John Payton did at the time, just trying to take care of the public health and welfare, and he had to raise taxes. And so we've got to grow up a bit in that degree, in that department, and realize to be more forward-thinking into what our costs are going to be. I can only tell you our costs are only going to get greater because the city's getting bigger. And I think that is something that if we're going to be a great city, we got a low tax base. We're one of the lowest tax places in the world. And you can't convince your constituents of that all the time, but I've served 3 terms on the council. I'm 62. I'm a grown man. I'm just going to tell you, sometimes you got to have money to pay for services. And I'll never forget, my dear old dad was chairman of finance the year before he ran for state senate. And my daddy could do this. I couldn't do it, but he could do it. He was finance committee chairman, and he raised the millage rate by 2 mills. Is that right, Paul? And everybody said, Eric Smith and John Forbes are going to hang that around your neck when you run for senate, and you're going to lose. And my dad looked at it and said, well, so be it, but if people want services, they got to pay for it. And my daddy had a way of talking like a stick of dynamite that got lit. And people agreed with him. And so
He beat him on. He was elected. He was elected on the first vote. He beat 2 incumbents that were in the House of Representatives, state senate.
now, if we could edit this tape and take all that tax talk I just made out, but it's a sensitive subject, but we've got to get over it. We've got to learn that we've got to invest. It's not raising taxes necessarily. You don't want to raise taxes to balance the checkbook. But if you've got to raise taxes to invest in your city to make it better for your children and your grandchildren, we should do that.
So we're still in the discussion of realities and perceptions. I have one more question for you guys, and I want to ask the audience what questions they might have. Here's my last question. In 1967, the local media, especially WJXT, with the programs they ran that led to grand jury and a number of indictments, and the Florida Times-Union, and more than any other journalist, the excellent writer Richard Martin held enormous influence on community thinking regarding consolidation. J.J. Dangle, biggest advocate of consolidation, took over ownership of the Times-Union and Jacksonville Journal. My question then is twofold. One, what do you think the role of the news media should be toward local government? And secondly, after years of local papers taking beatings, after downsizings, after loss of revenue due to the internet, etc., what can this community do to revitalize local media sources so that they can provide the kinds of services necessary to the democratic health of a community? Whoever wants to start.
I'd like to let our media expert, John Crescent, answer this.
What's that?
I think the paper, the newspapers turn into a hobby.
Yeah, amen.
It does not have any local to speak of. It doesn't, it cuts off at about 10 o'clock.
That's right.
So you don't get any news in the newspaper, the purpose of the newspaper.
And of course, they're dealing with really hard economic difficulties. You know, the internet, the fact that people did not start, when internet news became available to everybody, people didn't pay for it. Assuming, and if anybody wants to say otherwise, welcome that too, but assuming that we all believe that there is a role for freedom of the press and responsible local reporting, what do you think it is, and how can we encourage it in these very different times from 50 years ago?
I'm not sure you can.
Well,
You've got the internet, and it's quicker, things, but you gotta find some way to fund it, so it does a better way of covering the news.
So we've got to fund it, we've got that.
Well, I'm going to say one thing, because this is very interesting, because when I made the decision yesterday, I was going to try to do it yesterday, never got to it, so now this has brought it back to my mind. The paper's not perfect, there's no perfect publication, but do you think what we're getting on social media is accurate? I think what we're getting on CNN and all those channels is accurate, so come on. Fox. So, we're all, we got our Foxes and we got our CNNs and so forth, but I like the paper. And I am disappointed in how thin it has gotten. But I like the paper, and when I get home, I am going to pay for a year's subscription for my son Joseph and my son Matthew, because otherwise they don't get what's going on in our local government. And I think, that needs to be demonstrated to my own children who, I don't know, they get their news from dad, so of course that's going to be the truth, right? But I think it is a shame to see the local print media, because you watch TV, if you miss a commercial, you mute it, you come back, you get a Coke, you miss some of it. But with the paper, it's still there when you get home that night. And you can pick up where you left off in the morning. And I think the paper is real important to Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm a big supporter, and my boys are going to get papers, and I'm sure better get the money. My money's worth out of it.
12% of the people are reading the Times-Union, right?
But that doesn't matter. But
That doesn't matter because you have to ask the question, well, where are the majority of people getting the news?
Well,
I submit to you that a lot of it is television, and that's a weakness. John Crescent been shaking his head. Let me tell you something. What is really aggravating, if you have somebody come and interview you, is that they ask questions that indicate they don't have a clue what you're doing and what the issue is. They want you to educate them, and educate them to the degree that they can ask sensible questions. Right? The only decent media in this town, as far as I'm concerned, is in television, is Channel 4, and that's Jim Pickett, mainly more than anybody else. There are a couple of others before, At least he gets down there and he works hard for information, but the rest of them, they're all looking for a sensational story. That's what they're looking for.
I don't want to get different media sources competing against each other, but I do hope that we can hear the need to support a free and critical questioning and necessary is what I'm hearing, what I think too. Media. We have a few minutes. Can we get some questions? I'm sure we've got a lot. Yes, right here. Let me bring
No, I don't need a microphone. I got a built-in one. I really want to make two comments. Newspaper, education. This is what it's all about. The first 5 years forms the foundation of a child. That child's going to be an adult. If we don't start getting at that level, and we don't start putting newspapers into the schools, and those teachers read to those children, and you have the children come to the library and read the newspapers, let the children write their own stories, print their own little newspapers in their schools. What's going to happen when they become a teenager and an adult? They're going to want to read those newspapers. They're going to want to get involved. We're going to have to start there. And then I also want to make a comment about the county, city, where would it be? You talk of the county as being this big glob. We forget there were all these wonderful, rich, vibrant communities that have, at some point, almost died out completely. They are being revived. Mandarin, I remember when I moved here that if you wrote somebody a letter or a company and you mailed it, it was Mandarin, Florida. It wasn't Jacksonville, Florida. Murray Hill was a vibrant community. San Marco was a vibrant community. Riverside was a vibrant community. There were a lot of them. In Duval County, when Jacksonville consolidated, Jacksonville just sucked them all up, and they almost died too. And you keep calling Jacksonville the core. I grew up calling it downtown